He built his life on silence, numbers, and walls no one dared cross. But everything changes the morning two small children appear at his door, cold, hungry, and with only one name to give: his. Marcus Trenholm, a billionaire haunted by loss, never expected to open that door, and even Menno's Duxar QL's Entresem. But what begins as one night of shelter becomes a battle for their lives and his own soul. As secrets unravel and a dangerous man resurfaces, Marcus faces a choice: return to his world of isolation or fight for a family he never knew he needed. Stay with us, because this isn't just about saving two kids. It's about healing what no one sees. Marcus Trenholm never answered his own front door. Not in years. There were doormen, staff, protocols, but that morning something made him do it. Maybe it was the silence that seemed too complete, too expectant. Maybe it was the way his coffee had gone cold in his hands. Untouched after 2 hours of reviewing financial statements he couldn't seem to absorb. Or maybe it was the subtle flicker of movement on the security monitor, blur he would have normally ignored, yet didn't. Whatever the reason, he found himself walking down the hall of his pristine, sterile penthouse and standing before the heavy glass panel that led to the private vestibule. He pressed the button that unlocked the exterior door, and as it slid open, the winter air didn't rush in, but something heavier did. Two children. A girl, maybe 9. A boy, clearly younger. The girl had her chin up and her shoulders set, as if bracing for a blow that might still come. The boy clung to her hand, half buried in her oversized coat, clutching a tattered, earless rabbit. "Are you Marcus Trenholm?" the girl asked, her voice steady but quiet. Not begging, not afraid. Just, waiting. Marcus didn't respond at first. The question was surreal. Of course he was Marcus Trenholm. Everyone in the building knew him. The entire financial district knew him. But no one, absolutely no one, had ever shown up like this. Not without a press request, a security check, a purpose that could be measured in stock options or political leverage. Yet here stood two children with nothing but a backpack and a look in their eyes that didn't belong to their ages. He managed to say yes, but it came out strained. The girl nodded once and stepped forward, guiding her little brother with care. "Our mom said you could help," she said, and then after a breath, "She died this morning." The words were sharp in their simplicity, too large for such a small frame to carry. "We waited until the sun came up," she added. The boy said nothing. He only stared up at Marcus like a creature who had just stepped out of the wreckage and was trying to decide if the world was still dangerous. The girl finished softly, as if reciting a line. She said, "You used to know what was right, before you got rich." He could have laughed if it hadn't hit so precisely where he didn't expect to feel. He had no words ready for that, no dry wit, no formal dismissal, just the sensation of something shifting inside him, slow and uncomfortable. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already suspected it. Mariah Gallagher, the name echoed. He remembered her. A woman from long ago, from a fundraiser maybe? Bright, wild laughter, a refusal to accept his driver's offer. She had said she liked to walk. He hadn't seen her since. He certainly hadn't known she had children. The girl replied, "Anna." "This is Joel." Marcus nodded once. "Where were you before this?" The girl hesitated, her eyes sharpening. "The bus station." But then some man started looking at Joel weird. "We left." That alone made Marcus clench his jaw. "We walked," she added. "Mostly." His eyes dropped to their shoes, thin, soaked, barely holding together. Joel's scarf was too long, too perfumed. His cheeks were windburned. Anna's hands were visibly raw. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. There was too much wrong in the picture, and none of it could be solved by the usual solutions he was used to deploying. Seconds stretched like wire. He stood there watching two children wait for something neither of them demanded. He thought of calling someone, Child Protective Services, the building manager, anyone. Let them handle it. He had no experience with this. No training, no rights. But the moment didn't pass. Joel coughed lightly, one of those hollow, dry sounds that made you wince inside, and Anna moved without missing a beat, adjusting his scarf like a soldier caring for a wounded comrade. "We don't have anywhere else," she said simply. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a plea. It was just the truth, delivered without decoration. And in a world that constantly tried to package pain in glossy language, Marcus found that quiet honesty devastating. He had been begged for things with crocodile tears and smiling threats, but this was just a fact. One that didn't go away when you looked away. He didn't want to do this. He wasn't built for this. His apartment wasn't a place for children, and his life had no room for disruptions. But the thing about fractures is that you don't notice the crack until it runs all the way through. And this was a fracture, a deep one. A memory stirred somewhere far back, uninvited and unwelcome. His son, his laugh, his silence. The last time Marcus had carried a child was the day he lost him. He hadn't been the same since. Hadn't wanted to be. Hadn't tried. But now here was this moment, a girl with nothing but a name, a sentence from a dead mother, and a brother who trusted no one but her. "Your mother told you to find me?" he asked again, almost to buy time. Anna nodded. Joel pressed closer to her, eyes never leaving Marcus's face. Marcus looked down at his hand, the one still hovering near the doorframe. He hadn't moved it, hadn't pushed them away. That had to mean something. And then he did it, the thing that surprised even himself. He stepped aside, not dramatically, not with a speech or a sigh, just moved enough for them to walk past. "Come inside," he said, the words barely above a breath, but more solid than anything he'd spoken in weeks. Anna didn't thank him. She didn't hesitate. She looked at him once, measuring, acknowledging, and then tugged Joel's hand as they stepped into the lobby. The door closed behind them with a soft hiss, sealing them in. Marcus didn't follow right away. He stood still, letting the realization settle into his bones, that nothing from this point on would be the same, that a choice had been made. He hadn't been coerced, hadn't been tricked. He had opened the door. He had said the words. And now there were two small, uncertain sets of footsteps echoing behind him, tracing their way into his world, into something he had long ago stopped believing he deserved, a second chance. The elevator ride was quiet, not the kind of silence that suggested peace, but the taut, alert silence of people who didn't yet believe they were safe. Anna stood with her shoulders squared, her eyes darting once to the mirrored panels, once to Joel and once to Marcus, always returning to her brother. Joel leaned against her side, his hands still wrapped tightly around his rabbit. Marcus didn't speak. He kept his hands in his coat pockets, his expression unreadable, even to himself. When the elevator stopped at the penthouse, Anna hesitated. She didn't move until Marcus nodded once, not kindly, not harshly, just enough to acknowledge that she had the right to step in. The door opened into the cavernous living space. Glass, marble, cold lines. The children's shoes made soft sounds against the floor, tentative. Marcus watched them cross the threshold like people walking into a museum, unsure what they were allowed to touch. No one told them where to sit. Joel wandered toward the couch, but only sat after Anna did. Marcus went into the kitchen without a word. He didn't know what to say, and maybe that was better. They didn't seem to want words anyway, just space. Space to not be chased away. In the kitchen, Marcus stood in front of the open pantry and stared blankly. He couldn't remember the last time he cooked something for someone. Maybe he never had. But he found a can of soup, organic tomato basil, expensive, irrelevant. He poured it into a pot and turned on the heat. While it warmed, he grabbed a loaf of bread from the fridge and sliced it mechanically. He didn't think about stocks or phone calls or the messages piling up on his phone. He thought about Anna's hands, how red they were. Joel's cough. The weight of Mariah's words passed through a dying breath to her daughter. He used to know what was right. Was it even true? Had he known once? The soup simmered, the bread toasted. He found 2 bowls and set them on a tray like it was some fragile ritual. When he brought it out, Anna didn't thank him. She just accepted it with a nod, as if the gesture was foreign but necessary. Joel smiled weakly and said, "It smells good," before coughing again. Marcus sat across from them, not eating, just watching, not with judgment, with uncertainty, like someone trying to remember how to read. Joel ate slowly, one hand still gripping his rabbit's ear as if letting go would undo the security of the moment. His eyes closed halfway through the bowl, but he kept going, dipping his bread into the soup with a kind of sleepy stubbornness that made Marcus look away. Anna, on the other hand, ate methodically, every movement cautious, calculated. She barely looked up. Her mind, Marcus could tell, was still outside, tracking threats, replaying the last 24 hours, preparing for whatever came next. When Joel's eyes finally fluttered shut, the crust of his bread still between his fingers, Anna moved to take it from him but paused when Marcus reached for a blanket first. She stiffened, protective, but didn't stop him. Marcus draped it carefully over the boy, tucking it gently beneath his chin. His movements were awkward but sincere. When he looked up, Anna was staring at him, not with gratitude but with something closer to disbelief. Like she didn't know what to make of him yet. He didn't blame her. He didn't know what to make of himself either. He sat back, unsure what to say. "You can stay the night," he said eventually. "Tomorrow, we'll figure things out." Anna gave a small nod but said nothing. She stayed seated near Joel, her posture never relaxing. Marcus could see the way her eyes kept scanning the room, tracking exits, noting objects. She was a child trained by necessity, shaped by loss and responsibility far too early. She didn't cry. She didn't ask questions, and perhaps that was what unsettled Marcus the most. He had dealt with power brokers and billionaires, men who played at strength, but nothing in his world had ever prepared him for a girl who wore armor made entirely of silence. He sat down across from her again, picking up the untouched slice of bread from the tray, not to eat it, but to do something with his hands. He wanted to ask if she was okay, but the answer was obvious. She wasn't, and asking would only insult her. So instead, he tried something else. "That rabbit," he said, nodding toward Joel. "What's his name?" Anna looked at the rabbit for a long moment, then finally said, "His name is Rabbit." Her voice was flat, but something in it softened just a fraction. Marcus let the silence return, but this time, it was slightly less heavy. His phone rang, the screen lit up on the counter. He didn't even look. He knew what would be there: missed calls, urgent meetings, requests for approvals, questions only he could answer. For the first time in over a decade, he didn't reach for it. The noise passed. The silence stayed. And still the girl didn't ask him anything, not about tomorrow, not about why he hadn't kicked them out, not about what would happen next. Maybe because she'd learned not to expect follow-through. Maybe because she didn't believe yet that kindness wasn't conditional. Joel snored softly on the couch, a slow, rhythmic sound that filled the room more than any music could have. Marcus leaned back and let it happen. No one said anything else for the rest of the evening. No one needed to. In that long stretch of stillness, time didn't freeze. It simply slowed, enough for everyone to remember how to breathe. When Anna finally lowered her head against the side of the couch and let her eyes drift closed, Marcus stayed where he was, watching. He wasn't tired, but he didn't want to move either. Something about this moment felt fragile, and strangely necessary. Later, when the lights were dim and the only sound was Joel's breathing and the occasional sigh from Anna in her sleep, Marcus stood and quietly approached them again. Joel's bread crust had fallen to the floor. Marcus picked it up gently and set it aside. The boy had curled into a ball under the blanket, his rabbit clutched tightly beneath his chin. Marcus looked at him, really looked. The child's face was flushed but peaceful, far from the guarded stare he had arrived with. Marcus knelt, hesitated, then pulled the blanket further up to the boy's shoulder, a motion that meant nothing and everything. He turned to Anna. Her legs were still curled up on the sofa, arms wrapped around herself. Her face in sleep looked years younger. More like the child she should have been. And Marcus felt it, that quiet ache that had no language. He didn't know what to call it, only that it was real. He stood again slowly and walked back to the kitchen. No calls returned. No plans made. Just this. 2 children asleep in his home, and the unmistakable, undeniable realization that somehow, despite himself, he had already begun to care. For the first time in years, Marcus ignored every call, and instead of numbers, contracts, and meetings, he simply watched 2 children who asked for nothing, except not to be forgotten. The days that followed were not loud ones. No shouting, no tears, no questions thrown into the air with desperate hands. Instead, Marcus found himself navigating a world defined by silences that said more than words ever could. Joel, true to form, barely spoke to him. He responded to Anna, nodded when asked things gently, and whispered to his rabbit sometimes when he thought no one was listening. But Marcus noticed something else. The boy clung to his coat sleeve every time he so much as passed near the front door. A small hand, tight and quick, as if afraid that any step Marcus took in that direction meant he might vanish. The first time it happened, Marcus didn't even realize what the gesture meant. He only paused, looked down, and Joel stood there, expression blank but grip iron strong. "Bathroom?" Marcus asked. Joel shook his head. "Kitchen?" Another shake. Then after a beat, a single word. "No." Marcus didn't press. He simply turned away from the door. That became a quiet ritual. Whenever Marcus reached for keys or a coat, Joel would appear like a shadow, holding onto his sleeve until he stepped back from the exit. It was as if the child was drawing a line that said, "Don't leave. Not yet." Anna, in contrast, took a different approach. She never clung, she never asked, but she watched, always. If Marcus left a dish in the sink, she'd wash it. If Joel dropped crumbs on the carpet, she'd brush them into her palm and throw them away. She didn't speak unless necessary, but her eyes never rested. Marcus began to feel like he was being audited by a tiny, haunted accountant. One evening, he poured her a glass of juice and set it beside her plate. She stared at it for 5 seconds too long before saying, "You don't have to do all this." Marcus, caught off guard, shrugged. "It's just juice." "It's not just juice," she said quietly. "People don't usually do things unless they want something." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He could have launched into explanations about safety, about temporary help, about how he wasn't like other people, but he didn't. Instead, he simply said, "I don't want anything from you." Anna didn't respond, but the glass was empty by the end of dinner. That night, when she thought he wasn't looking, she refolded the blanket he'd left on the couch. Not for gratitude, more like acknowledgement, her way of saying, "I see you too." It was on the third day that Marcus, without meaning to, gave away more than he intended. Joel had fallen asleep again with soup crusted on his chin, his rabbit tucked under one arm. Marcus cleaned him off gently, careful not to wake him. Anna sat nearby, legs folded, reading a book too advanced for her age. "He used to hate naps," Marcus said, more to himself than to her. Anna looked up, confused. "Your son?" The question hung in the air like a pinprick to the skin sharp, small, but undeniably there. Marcus paused, unsure why he'd spoken at all. "Yeah," he said finally. "He died. A long time ago." He didn't look at her. He didn't want to. But after a moment of silence, she replied, "People stop talking about things like that. They think if you don't say it, it didn't happen." Marcus finally met her gaze. There was no pity in her expression, just understanding. Like she'd been waiting for someone else to say the thing out loud so she didn't have to. "Was it an accident?" she asked. Marcus nodded once. "Car." Anna didn't cry, didn't gasp. She only nodded back, then returned to her book. But the air between them had shifted. That exchange didn't birth a sudden closeness. There were no hugs, no grand outpourings of trust, but something had cracked open. The next morning, Anna left a sticky note on the fridge. "Joel likes apples without the skin." She didn't sign it, but Marcus recognized her small, slanted handwriting. Later, she accepted his offer to help with homework, letting him sit beside her as she reviewed math problems. She didn't ask for the answers, only his presence. Joel, meanwhile, began sitting closer during breakfast, sometimes placing his rabbit on the table like it was part of the conversation. Marcus found himself adjusting his schedule, pushing back meetings, ignoring emails. His assistant was baffled, his lawyer annoyed. Marcus didn't care. The world could wait. These moments couldn't. And slowly the children began to occupy space not just in his home, but in his routine, in his thoughts. They weren't demanding it, they weren't even aware of it. But they were becoming part of his life, not by force, but by presence, by existing, by staying. That night, as Joel fell asleep clutching his rabbit and Anna sat with her knees pulled to her chest, Marcus felt the weight of something old returning. Not grief exactly, not guilt. Something more raw. Recognition. He'd built a life designed to keep everyone out, clients, friends, even himself. But these two had slipped in through a side door he didn't know was open, and now they were in his kitchen, his living room, his silence. He didn't know what came next. He didn't even know what this was. All he knew was that he didn't want them to leave. Not yet, maybe not ever. He hadn't said it out loud. He hadn't even dared think it clearly. But the truth was there, lingering in the space between a refilled cup of juice and a blanket quietly refolded on a couch. That was the difference. Before, he had been alone with his ghosts. Now there were others in the house. And they had ghosts too. When Marcus revealed that he had once had a son, lost in an accident, the silence between him and Anna changed temperature. Two losses recognized one another, and even without shared confessions, they both understood something unspoken. The pain had never left. It had merely learned to hide in places no one dared to look. Marcus knew something was off the second the doorman called up, voice taut and uncertain. "There's a man down here asking for you. Says his name's Nathan Maxwell." Won't say more. Marcus's heart didn't race, but it clenched, the way it did in boardrooms before hostile takeovers. He walked to the elevator without a word to Anna, who was helping Joel with a puzzle on the living room floor. When he opened the lobby door, the man standing there was exactly the kind of trouble you recognized without needing an introduction. Nathan looked unwashed, his eyes bloodshot, wearing a smirk that was part arrogance, part challenge. "Well, look who's been playing, Daddy," he said before Marcus could even open his mouth. "I was wondering when I'd get a peek at the man who thinks he can just scoop up someone else's kid." His voice was too loud, too casual, like he was performing the role of someone confident, but there was something else under it, something greedy. "Joel's mine," Nathan added. "Biologically, you know what that means, don't you?" Marcus didn't respond, he didn't blink, he just stared. Nathan laughed under his breath. "Relax, I'm not here to make trouble. Unless, of course, you want it that way." Joel hadn't come downstairs, but Anna had. She stood halfway down the steps, frozen. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, but her knuckles were white. And Joel, he hadn't followed, but when Nathan's voice carried up into the stairwell, Marcus saw the effect immediately. Joel appeared behind Anna like a shadow being pulled backward. One look at him and Marcus understood everything he needed to know. The boy didn't cry, he didn't scream, but he flinched as if the sound of that voice had split something open inside him. His fingers curled into the fabric of Anna's shirt. Marcus took a slow step forward, subtly blocking their view. "You're not welcome here," Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. Nathan didn't back away. "I'm not here to play house," he sneered. "Let's not pretend this is about the kids. This is about leverage, about options." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "You and I both know how this game is played. You don't want headlines. I don't want courtrooms. Let's make each other disappear." Marcus didn't take the envelope. He didn't ask what was in it. He didn't need to. Instead, he stepped forward, grasped the door frame, and with a final look at Joel, slowly closed the door firm, final, and without another word. Back upstairs, Marcus said nothing at first. Anna helped Joel onto the couch, where he pulled his rabbit to his chest and lay curled like he was bracing for something to fall on him. Marcus stood in the hallway watching them silently, tension radiating through his spine. He could still hear Nathan's voice in his ears like oil slicking over clean water. The suggestion, the smirk, the implied threat, not just to Marcus but to the children. That was what truly made his stomach turn, not that Nathan existed, but that he had returned, that he could claim any right, any power over them again. Anna finally looked at him, her voice sharp and brittle. "Are you going to send us back?" It hit Marcus like a slap. "No," he said with a quiet certainty. "No one is going anywhere." She stared at him for a moment longer before nodding and sitting beside Joel. Marcus turned away and walked to his office, but not to hide. He needed to think, not just about Nathan, but about everything this meant. About what could happen. About what he had to do. That night, Marcus sat on the armchair across from the sofa and watched Joel sleep. The boy's body was curled tight into itself, arms locked around the rabbit like it might float away if he let go. There were marks on his skin that hadn't come from any recent fall. Marcus hadn't asked, hadn't pushed. But tonight the full weight of them crashed in. This wasn't just trauma. This was history, and that history might still legally matter to the wrong people. Marcus leaned back and covered his face with one hand, letting the thoughts come. Money wouldn't be enough. Not this time. Influence might help, but it would be a fight. He would have to bring his name into it. Open himself to scrutiny, and the children would be dragged through it too. But what was the alternative? Hand Joel back to a man who made him disappear behind his sister the moment he heard his name? Give Anna more years of being the adult in a house with no real safety? That wasn't an option. Not for anyone with a soul. Especially not for a man who'd spent years pretending he didn't have one. When the house went quiet, Marcus rose slowly and went to the kitchen. He poured a glass of water, then let it sit untouched on the counter. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a message from his assistant, something about an upcoming meeting, numbers, projections. He turned it off without reading. He returned to the living room and sat down again, watching Joel's small chest rise and fall beneath the blanket. Anna had fallen asleep too, sitting upright, her head tilted awkwardly against the cushion. For a moment, Marcus did nothing. Then gently, he placed a folded throw across her knees. Something in him tightened as he looked at them, these two children who hadn't asked to be here, who hadn't asked for him, but who were now his responsibility whether anyone else saw it that way or not. That was the moment. Not dramatic, not loud, but it was real. The line between observer and protector had been crossed. That night, after the apartment had settled into stillness, Marcus sat alone in the darkness, watching the silhouettes of Anna and Joel as they slept. Nathan's presence had left a mark, like dirt smeared across a clean page, but it had also brought something into sharp focus. This wasn't about fear anymore. It wasn't about obligation. It was about choice. About doing what was right, not because it was easy, but because someone had to stand up when the system wouldn't. Joel deserved to sleep without fear. Anna deserved to grow up without becoming the shield for her brother. Marcus knew then, without room for hesitation, that he would fight, not just against Nathan, but against the entire machine that allowed men like Nathan to show up and make claims as if ecology were the only thing that mattered. Marcus would fight for them both because someone had to, and because for the first time in years he wanted to. That night he watched Joel sleep, curled into himself, and made his first real decision. He would fight. Not just against Nathan, but against a whole system that could swallow these two the way it had swallowed so many others. Anna sat perfectly still in the wooden chair outside the courtroom, her back straight, hands folded in her lap. The dress she wore was one her mother had once bought at a thrift store, saved for important days, and though it had grown a little tight at the sleeves, she didn't complain. Her hair was pulled back into a low braid, just the way her mother used to do it before school or appointments. It wasn't vanity. It was preparation, survival. Marcus sat beside her, dressed in his usual tailored calm, but she could feel the tension beneath his composed surface. He kept checking his watch, not because of time, but because this was something he couldn't control. "You don't have to do this," he had said that morning, voice low, crouched in front of her like she was fragile. She had looked him dead in the eye and answered, "I know, but I will." And now, when the court officer came out and softly called her name, she stood without hesitation. Joel squeezed her hand once, then let go. She stepped through the doorway, alone, but not really. Marcus watched her go, heart tight in a way he hadn't known it could still be. Inside, the room was too large and too official, but Anna didn't let it shake her. She had rehearsed the story in her head 100 times, not to dramatize it, but to make sure she got it right. She sat in the witness chair, legs barely reaching the floor, and folded her hands in her lap again. When the judge asked her name, she answered clearly. When she was asked if she knew why she was there, she nodded once. "To help decide if me and Joel stay with Mr. Marcus or not," the judge, a woman with kind but tired eyes, asked if she was comfortable answering a few questions. Anna said yes. The rest came slowly but steadily. She described the nights Nathan came home angry, the way his voice could cut through walls. How her mother would send them to the bedroom and turn up the radio. She cried in the kitchen, Anna said, not blinking. Even when there wasn't any food. She cried because she didn't know how to leave. Then came the questions about Joel. Did Nathan ever hit him? Did he yell at him? Anna hesitated. Not because she didn't know, but because the truth was heavier when said aloud. He was always quiet after, she said simply. Quieter than usual. The courtroom remained still. Marcus watched from the back, fists clenched around nothing. Wasn't allowed to interrupt or hold her hand, and it killed him. Anna's voice didn't waver, but he could see the way her shoulders stiffened with each memory she dragged up. She spoke about the day their mother died. About waking up and knowing something was wrong before even checking the bedroom. About Joel not speaking at all that morning, only holding her sleeve like he used to hold their mother's. When the lawyer asked what they did next, she said, "We went to him. To Mr. Marcus, because Mom said he was someone who used to know what was right. I hoped maybe he still did." A small ripple of reaction moved through the courtroom, but Anna didn't notice. She was too focused, too trained, too young to carry words like those, and yet she carried them with the grace of someone who had run out of other options. The prosecutor asked if she felt safe now. Anna turned her head, found Marcus with her eyes, and said clearly, "I feel safe now." Joel laughs now. "So do I." But that didn't happen before. The judge leaned forward, her pen unmoving for the first time. "Anna," she said gently, "do you know what the word permanent means?" Anna nodded. "If the court grants custody to Mr. Trenholm, it means this home won't change again unless something goes wrong. Do you understand?" Anna swallowed once. "Yes, ma'am," the judge continued. "Then I need to ask, what do you want?" The silence that followed was thick, not heavy with uncertainty, heavy with meaning. Anna looked down at her hands, then at the people in the room. She took a deep breath. "I want to stay where I feel safe," she said. "Where we don't have to be afraid all the time. Where we laugh and eat dinner together. Where someone knocks before entering your room and listens when you say you're scared." She paused, eyes flicking to Marcus once more. "I want to stay where I don't have to be the grown-up. Where Joel can be little again." Then softly but with certainty she added, "I want to stay where we laugh for real." The courtroom wasn't a place where people clapped or cried loudly. But something changed in the air after Anna spoke. Something subtle, but powerful. The judge wrote something down, nodded once, and said that the court would take the testimony into consideration and deliver a ruling in due course. Anna was dismissed. She stepped down without faltering, walked back to where Marcus sat, and as soon as she sat next to him, Joel climbed into her lap without a word. Marcus reached out, placed a hand on her shoulder, not to praise, not to comfort, just to anchor. She didn't lean into it, but she didn't flinch either. The hallway outside the courtroom was quiet as they waited for the car. "You did well," Marcus said eventually. Anna looked up at him and said, "I didn't do it for me." He nodded, understanding. "I know. They didn't say more. They didn't need to." The judge didn't give a ruling that day. The legal system moved slower than the urgency in Marcus's heart, but something had already been decided, at least for him. When Anna had said those words, "where we laugh for real," he had understood something he hadn't known until that moment. He wasn't just protecting her. She was protecting him too, from the man he had been becoming before they knocked on his door. She reminded him of who he still had a chance to be. And that, Marcus knew, was the kind of testimony no court could ignore. The knock on the door wasn't expected. Marcus rarely received visitors unannounced, and ever since Nathan's shadow had darkened his doorstep, he had made sure the front desk didn't let anyone through without checking first. But this time they had called up with a name, Kendra Lattimore. He didn't recognize it at first, but when he opened the door, the woman standing there wasn't a stranger. Her face was lined with worry and time, her coat cheap but buttoned tightly, and in her hands she clutched a thick manila folder like it was something sacred. "You don't know me," she began, "but I knew Mariah. Since we were 16, I was at the hospital when Joel was born. I used to help her with rent sometimes when Nathan would vanish for weeks." Marcus didn't say anything. He simply stepped aside and let her in. She hesitated, not out of fear, but caution, and walked through the doorway like it carried more than just snow behind it. "She told me a long time ago if anything ever happened to her, I should give this to someone who'd care." Her eyes landed on him. "She meant you, even back then." They sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Joel had drawn his lopsided family sketches and Anna had done her homework under Marcus's quiet supervision. Kendra opened the folder slowly, reverently, and spread the contents like a story that had waited too long to be told. There were letters, some never mailed, receipts for things like heating, fuel, emergency clinic visits, overdue rent, scribbled notes in Mariah's hand, grocery lists interspersed with lines like "Ask Dr. Hill about fever" and "Anna needs new shoes," "thrift store." Then, near the bottom, a sealed envelope marked for Joel. Someday. Kendra didn't open it, but she pointed to another document, a paternity test dated years earlier, never filed officially. "She did it after Joel turned 1, Kendra said quietly. She always knew Nathan wasn't the father, but she was scared. Scared if it got out, he'd take it out on Joel, or worse, she'd lose both kids in the system. Marcus's throat tightened. His eyes scanned the test results. The line under paternal match read negative, definitively, undeniably. Joel had no biological connection to the man trying to claim him. A truth buried under fear and silence. Marcus sat back in his chair, every bone in his body heavy with a new kind of rage. Not the kind that comes fast and loud, but the kind that builds slow and quiet. The kind that comes when you realize how many people looked away. A woman had died in a cold trailer, unnoticed, unprotected, with 2 children depending on her, and the world had just let it happen. The system, the one with checklists, case numbers, and rotating social workers, had failed her long before she stopped breathing. And now the man who had hurt her, haunted her, claimed her son as leverage in some twisted bid for control. She was trying to protect them, Marcus muttered, more to himself than to Kendra. She was doing everything alone. Kendra nodded. She never asked for much. Just wanted to keep them together. Wanted Joel to grow up without fear. Marcus's hands gripped the edge of the table, not in frustration, but in anchoring. The truth had always been close, right under the surface. And now that it had a name and a file and ink on paper, everything changed. Kendra didn't linger. She said what she came to say, then looked Marcus in the eye one last time before heading for the door. "You seem like the kind of man who doesn't let things go," she said. "Mariah trusted you. Don't let that go to waste." He walked her to the elevator without a word, folder tucked under his arm, chest burning not with confusion but clarity. When the door slid shut and her figure disappeared, he stood there for a long time, folder still in hand, as if feeling the weight of what it truly meant. Back inside, the apartment was quiet. Joel was napping, Anna curled up on the armchair reading, the kind of scene that could almost pass for normal. But nothing was the same now. Marcus looked at the folder again, at the stack of documents that bore witness to a life lived in the shadows, a life that deserved more than the ending it got. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Marcus returned to the table. He opened the envelope marked for Joel but didn't read its contents. It wasn't his to read, not yet. Instead, he placed it back gently, sealing it again as best he could, and pressed his palms against the table like someone about to push through something heavy. There was a decision to make, but unlike the others before, this one didn't require thought. It had already been made the moment Anna and Joel had appeared at his door, the moment he had let them in, the moment he had chosen not to look away. Still, this folder made it official. Joel wasn't Nathan's child, not by blood, not by bond, not by any measure that mattered. Marcus knew what that meant legally. It gave them a chance. A real one. And more than that, it gave him a weapon in a system built to question men like him, men with money but no real ties. Now he had evidence, he had truth, and he had no more excuses. With the folder still in his hands, Marcus stood from the table. He didn't rush, didn't storm out or crumble in a dramatic pause. He simply stood, like someone who had found solid ground after weeks in a storm. Every paper, every letter, every line scribbled by a mother trying to keep her children safe now lived in his care. It was no longer just about doing what was right, it was about undoing what had been wrong for too long. He looked toward the hallway where the children slept and nodded once to himself. There was no more hesitation, no more in-betweens. What needed to be done was clear now. He would fight. He would not let Joel be taken by a man who had no claim and no love. And he would not let Anna grow up thinking silence was strength. With the folder in hand, Marcus walked toward his office. He had calls to make, documents to prepare, a war to wage, and this time he wasn't backing down. It didn't happen all at once. There was no grand declaration, no date circled on a calendar that marked the moment things shifted. But somewhere between Joel asking for a second pancake on a Sunday morning and Anna asking to stay up just a little later tonight, something had quietly rearranged itself inside the apartment and inside Marcus. The mornings no longer began with emails, but with Joel tugging his sleeve and whispering good morning, in a voice still unsure but trying. Marcus began making breakfast, real breakfast, not just coffee and fruit, and though he didn't know how to flip pancakes without ruining half of them, Joel still clapped every time as if burnt edges were a triumph. On the fridge, Marcus had started taping up the kids' drawings, even the ones that were mostly scribbles or stick figures with arms coming out of heads. It was Anna who first noticed. "You never put anything else up here," she said one day cautiously. Marcus had only nodded. Nothing else ever made sense to. The table was originally set for one, a sleek, angular piece more for decoration than function, but now it had been replaced by a modest wooden table with 3 mismatched chairs, each chosen by the children at a thrift store expedition that Marcus had pretended to dread and secretly enjoyed. One chair was slightly wobbly, the other had chipped paint, and the third, Marcus's, creaked when he leaned back. But it felt right. Meals were now shared affairs, filled with small talk and moments that mattered more than Marcus ever anticipated. Joel had started practicing letters during these meals, sounding out his own name at breakfast and growing frustrated when the E wouldn't curve right. "You're doing great," Marcus would tell him, and Joel, who once flinched at raised voices and sudden movements, now beamed under gentle praise. Anna, always watchful, always quiet, had begun asking questions that didn't just scratch the surface. "What was your favorite toy as a kid?" she asked one night over spaghetti. Marcus had to think. He couldn't remember. That made her frown just slightly. Anna had also become comfortable enough to push boundaries, albeit cautiously. "Can we stay up late tonight?" she'd ask with a smile, too practiced for someone her age. "Just this once?" Marcus had rules, or at least he used to, but now, seeing her snuggled on the couch with a book too big for her age and Joel asleep beside her, it didn't feel like a rule worth enforcing. He found himself saying yes more often than no, and strangely, that didn't feel like weakness. It felt like learning. He also stopped answering most work calls after 6 p.m., and emails sat unread in his inbox longer than his assistants liked. Meetings were rescheduled, calls missed, deals delayed. "It's delayed. You've changed," one of his business partners said during a tense phone call. Marcus didn't deny it. "That's the point," he replied. Because what waited for him at home wasn't just silence anymore. It was laughter, even if faint, and trust, even if new. And he wasn't about to trade that for another zero in his portfolio. Then came the school project. Anna had been quiet about it for days, not hiding it but not offering it either. On a Tuesday afternoon, she walked into the kitchen where Marcus was attempting to make grilled cheese and placed a folded sheet of paper on the counter. "It's just homework," she said quickly. But her eyes searched his face for something: reaction, approval, maybe understanding. The title at the top of the page read, "My Favorite Place in the World." He expected something poetic or vague, something about libraries or trees or maybe even the stars. But it wasn't. It was simple, almost too simple. She wrote about the kitchen table, the way it always had 3 chairs, the smell of pancakes, Joel's laughter when Marcus burned the eggs, her own seat by the window. "It's not just about the food," she had written. "It's about how nobody eats alone here." Marcus read the paper 3 times before he folded it carefully and tucked it into his wallet. He didn't say anything then. He couldn't. But when she left the room, he sat down and stared at the paper like it was made of something sacred. That night, Marcus found himself staring at the old photo of his son, the one he always carried but hadn't looked at in weeks. It felt different now, not like a wound but a scar that still ached but didn't control him. He took the photo out of its slot gently and slid on his essay behind it. Not to hide it, but to hold it close, to place one piece of his heart beside another. Loss had once made him empty, angry, and cold, but now it made him deliberate. It made him present. That table, once symbolic of solitude, had become a place of restoration, of quiet healing disguised as routine. A family not born but built. Joel with his slow smiles and sudden hugs. Anna with her watchful eyes and brave words, and Marcus with his wallet now carrying more than just business cards and grief. It carried proof of what they had become together. When Marcus went to bed that evening, the apartment felt full. Not loud, not chaotic, but alive. He passed the kitchen once more, his hand brushing the edge of the table. 3 chairs. 3 stories tangled into one unexpected narrative. No one had planned this, and yet it felt inevitable. A kind of quiet belonging that couldn't be bought or scheduled, only earned. As he turned off the light, he didn't say anything out loud, but he knew the truth in his bones. He wasn't just taking care of them, they were taking care of him too. And the proof wasn't in the courts or custody papers. It was in a piece of lined notebook paper folded inside his wallet, tucked right behind the photo of his son. Nathan Maxwell entered the courtroom as if it belonged to him, shoulders squared with a smugness that didn't quite reach his eyes. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt and a borrowed tie that still had the tag dangling from the back. But he carried himself like someone who had learned to manipulate rooms, not with truth, but with volume and accusation. As he took the stand, he used his last name like a weapon, reminding everyone that Joel was a Maxwell by blood and therefore, by default, his... He spoke of regret clumsily, rehearsed and said he'd turn things around, though he failed to name a single step he'd taken in that direction. When asked about his past with Mariah, he avoided eye contact and blamed stress. When asked about Joel's needs, he mentioned clothes, meals, housing, all physical. "I can give him what he needs," Nathan said, his voice rising slightly. "Better than some rich guy trying to buy a conscience." He pointed at Marcus, calling him a man with no kids of his own anymore, words that landed like a slap, calculated and cruel. But Marcus didn't flinch. Not here, not now. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, the room seemed to exhale. He stood with a quiet that demanded attention, not because it was loud, but because it was full. He didn't counter Nathan's insults. He didn't even glance his way. Instead, he faced the judge and spoke in a tone that was steady, almost low, but clear. "I'm not here to replace anyone," he said. "Not their mother. Not a past that hurt them. I'm just ... here." Then he told them, not with embellishment, not with tears, about the morning of the snowstorm, about the knock on the door, and how 2 strangers with nothing had given him back something he didn't know he'd lost: purpose. He described how Joel flinched at loud voices, how Anna held her questions like secrets, and how silence between them became its own language. They didn't ask for anything, he said. They just didn't want to be forgotten. And that, more than any wealth or title, is what moved him to act. He didn't speak for long. Just enough. Enough to tell the truth and let it speak for itself. The judge asked questions, formal ones, procedural, about stability, background checks, financial readiness, but also about emotional readiness. Marcus answered them all, not with curated perfection, but with sincerity. He mentioned therapy. He admitted he had made mistakes in the past, that his grief over losing his son had once made him cold, unreachable. But he'd changed, not because he wanted to be seen differently, but because Anna and Joel had changed him without asking him to. "I didn't fix them," he said plainly. "They fixed me." The courtroom was quiet. Even Nathan, who had been shifting in his seat with growing impatience, seemed unsure of what to say next. The weight of honesty did what arrogance couldn't. It held the room. Anna watched Marcus from the back of the room, her hands in her lap, her spine straight. Joel sat beside her, his small hand clenched around the armrest. No one spoke. No one needed to. For once, everything that mattered had been said. After a short recess, the judge returned with her decision. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't build suspense. She simply stated the facts. Marcus Trenholm would retain temporary custody. The petition for permanent guardianship would move forward. Her words were clipped, professional, but her eyes lingered a beat longer on Marcus than protocol required. "The court recognizes that safety is not just about shelter," she said before moving on. Marcus nodded once, gratefully. It wasn't over, but it was a beginning, one earned, not given. Nathan stood abruptly, muttered something unintelligible, and left the courtroom without so much as a glance at the children. Joel didn't look at him. Anna did for a moment, but there was no hate in her eyes, only exhaustion. A chapter had closed. Not cleanly, not without scars, but it had closed. As they stepped outside, the cold met them like a reminder that the world was still hard, still uncertain. But this time, they weren't stepping into it alone. Joel reached for Marcus's hand, not out of fear, but instinct. It was the first time he'd done it without hesitation. His fingers were small, but the grip was sure. "Can we go home now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus looked down at him and nodded. "Yeah, buddy," he said. "We're going home." He didn't say more. He didn't have to. Anna moved to his other side, silent as always, but walking just a little closer than before. There were no victory speeches, no swelling music, just three people walking down courthouse steps into a future none of them had planned for. But all of them, in their own quiet ways, had chosen. And so they went, not just toward a building or an address, but toward something harder to define and more important to hold home. Even after the judge's ruling, something in the air refused to settle. The legal decision brought a sense of direction, but not peace. Marcus noticed it first in the way Joel clung to Anna again at night, asking for the hallway light to be left on even though he'd stopped needing that a week ago. Then Anna stopped sitting near the windows. She glanced out only with quick, darting looks, like someone expecting to see something they hoped wouldn't be there. And then one morning she saw it. A dark car parked across the street, engine idling. The same model that had pulled up behind their old trailer once, the one Nathan used to slam his door so hard it rattled the windows. She didn't scream or panic. She just told Marcus calmly, and then went back to brushing her hair with more force than necessary. That quiet fear, the kind that sinks instead of spikes, told Marcus everything. The threat hadn't gone. It had just changed its shape. And it wasn't just about Nathan anymore. It was about how trauma follows, even in silence, even after the paperwork says you're safe. Marcus tried to carry the tension without letting it leak, but kids who've lived through chaos can sense the things adults try to hide. Joel began to startle at the smallest noises, flinching at the slam of a drawer or the buzz of Marcus's phone on the counter. He didn't cry, not outright, but his drawings changed. Where there had been flowers and houses, now there were stick figures with wide eyes and thick black lines across the page. Anna, older and sharper, noticed before Marcus did. "He's scared again," she told Marcus plainly one evening as they both stood at the kitchen sink. "He thinks that car means we'll have to leave." Marcus looked at her, realizing she hadn't phrased it as a question. She wasn't testing him. She was preparing herself. And that's when he understood the full weight of what had been put on this little girl's shoulders. Not just protecting Joel from the world, but preparing him to run if necessary. That instinct didn't vanish with warm meals or court documents. It needed something deeper to unlearn. Later that night, long after Joel had fallen asleep with his arms around his now nearly threadbare stuffed rabbit, Marcus found Anna sitting on the couch in her pajamas, knees drawn up, hugging a cushion to her chest. She didn't look at him at first when he sat down beside her. "You said we were safe now," she whispered. It wasn't an accusation. It was a quiet kind of ache, like she needed to believe it but couldn't quite allow herself to. Marcus didn't rush to answer. He took a breath, knowing this wasn't a moment for comfort. It was a moment for truth. "We are," he said, "but sometimes people don't respect that, and sometimes fear hangs around longer than it should. But it doesn't mean we stop living." Anna turned her head then slowly and looked up at him. "You're not going to leave, are you?" The words were fragile, like they'd cost her something to say out loud. Marcus shook his head. "No, never." Her eyes studied his face as if trying to catch any flicker of uncertainty. "Even if he comes back?" she asked. Her voice was steady now, but behind it, Marcus could feel the long echo of everything she'd seen, everything she'd been forced to survive, her mother crying behind thin walls, a brother too scared to sleep, and a world that kept proving no one stayed. That question wasn't about Nathan. It was about everyone else before Marcus who hadn't stayed. He leaned forward, rested his arms on his knees, and said it as clearly as he knew how, "Even if he comes back, even if it gets harder, you and Joel, you're not a temporary thing in my life. You're my choice." The words hung between them for a moment, not dramatic, not emotional, just true. And in that truth, something shifted. Not fixed, but shifted, like the first step toward solid ground after too long on ice. Anna didn't answer right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch, this time not with fear, but with thought. Then, without a word, she leaned her head lightly against Marcus's arm. It wasn't affection for show. It was something more sacred, trust being allowed, inch by inch. Marcus stayed there with her, not saying anything else. He didn't need to. He knew enough about grief to recognize when it started making room for something else. It wasn't that the fear was gone, it wasn't. But now it wasn't something Anna was holding alone. She had someone to share it with. Joel would have that too. That was what Marcus had promised himself in court and beyond. This wasn't just about fighting Nathan. It was about healing from everything that had come before him, and everything that might still try to return. That night, as Anna returned to her room and Marcus quietly checked Joel's breathing like he still did more often than he admitted, there was a weight in the apartment, yes, but there was also a resolve, a clarity. Fear hadn't left, but it had been met with something stronger. A choice. A promise. A new kind of family taking shape not through blood or obligation, but through moments like this. A question asked in the dark and an answer that didn't flinch. No matter what happens, Marcus had said, "You're my choice." And for a child who had learned too early that even love could leave, those words were everything. Let me know when you're ready for Chapter 10 or if you'd like this one adjusted. The letter came on a morning that was supposed to be ordinary, the kind of morning that had become the new normal in Marcus's life, filled with the smell of toast slightly burnt by Joel's impatience and the sound of Anna's laugh echoing faintly from the living room, where she was helping her brother draw comic strips with dinosaurs and astronauts. It was tucked among the usual stack of envelopes, unassuming and thin. But when Marcus saw the official seal of the state court, his hands hesitated. He stood at the counter, holding the letter like it might dissolve if he opened it too fast. Then slowly he unfolded it. The words were direct, bureaucratic even, but to him, they landed like thunder. Full custody granted. Permanently, legally, irrevocably. Marcus wasn't a man prone to sentimentality, but as he looked up and saw Joel with marker smudges on his cheek and Anna curled in the corner of the couch with a book far too advanced for her age, something inside him cracked open. He cleared his throat and read the decision aloud. Steady, clear. He didn't look at them right away. He didn't have to. Joel was the first to react, so that means I can put my name sticker on the bedroom door now? His voice was hopeful, unsure, like he thought there might still be a catch. Anna looked at him and nodded before Marcus even responded, and then Joel, with the uncontainable joy of a child who'd been waiting for too long to exhale, ran down the hallway in search of the sticker sheet he'd hidden in the back of a drawer. Anna remained seated, eyes fixed on Marcus. She didn't smile right away. She studied him the way she always did when something mattered more than words could express. Then, without a single sound, she stood, crossed the room, and wrapped her arms tightly around him. Not a polite hug, not a cautious one, but the kind that carried the full weight of every goodbye she'd ever had to say, and the relief of knowing she would never have to say one again. Marcus placed his hand on her back and closed his eyes. It was the first time she had initiated an embrace. It wasn't something he would forget. Later that day, when things had calmed and the emotion had shifted into quieter forms like shared glances, small smiles, and the peace that settles when a storm has truly passed, Marcus found himself cleaning up the aftermath of breakfast. Joel had gone back to coloring, now labeling his creations with Joel Trenholm written in bold, backward letters. Anna had returned to her book, but her gaze lifted to meet Marcus's now and then, a silent confirmation between them. This was real. This was home. Marcus moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, grabbing empty cups, wiping counters. That's when he noticed it. A new sheet of paper on the refrigerator door stuck with a crooked magnet shaped like a cat. A drawing, simple, almost crude in execution, but unmistakably profound in meaning. 3 stick figures holding hands. The taller one had glasses. The smaller one had a floppy-eared rabbit. The girl in the middle had a heart drawn on her shirt. Above them, stars scattered the sky. And beneath the image, written in round, uncertain letters, "Our home." He stood there longer than he meant to. Not because the drawing surprised him. The children had been making little sketches for weeks now, but because this one felt different. Not a wish, not a dream, but a declaration. A statement of something that was no longer fragile or temporary. It wasn't just paper and crayons, it was proof. Proof that they believed it too. That it wasn't just Marcus choosing them anymore, they had chosen him back. That realization hit him harder than the court ruling. The legal process had recognized what he already knew. But this picture, these words, that moment of unspoken acknowledgement, this was the real adoption. It happened not with documents, but with trust. Marcus took the drawing gently, almost reverently, and stared at it one more time before putting it back in place. Let it stay there, crooked and perfect for everyone to see. That night, after the dishes were done and the lights were dimmed, Marcus passed by the children's rooms. Joel had fallen asleep with one leg sticking out from under the blanket, arms still wrapped around his rabbit. Anna was still awake, her eyes flicking between the pages of a book in the ceiling, as if daring herself to relax. He didn't say anything, just walked to each of their doors and lingered a moment longer than usual. Back in his own room, Marcus opened his wallet, now worn at the edges. Behind the photograph of his late son, folded with care, sat Anna's essay, "My Favorite Place in the World," and now, beside it, he slipped a photo he had taken of the new drawing. Not to forget, but to remember. Always. There were no fireworks that night. No champagne. Just a quiet exhale that had taken months to arrive, and that was enough. Forever, it turned out, wasn't a grand gesture. It was a sticker on a bedroom door, a picture on a fridge, a child's arm wrapping around your waist without asking, and a label written in uncertain letters by a hand still learning to spell. Marcus never believed in the word forever before. Not really. But now, sitting at the table with 2 bowls of cereal already poured for tomorrow and a glass of water set next to his chair like Joel always insisted, he understood. Forever could fit in 3 letters. And on the fridge, under stars and stick figures, those letters were written for all of them. Our home. And now it was true. We're so grateful you spent this time with us today. Every story we share here is created with a lot of heart and care, thinking about you, our community, and how each moment might touch your life. If this video resonated with you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Your stories, reflections, and ideas mean so much to us. By subscribing to our channel and exploring our other videos, you help us keep bringing you more heartfelt stories like this one. Each subscription, each like, each comment is a reminder that these stories matter, and that together, we're building something truly special. Thank you for being part of this journey with us. We can't wait to read what this story meant to you.